The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 16th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of the light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Now, if I were to rank the parables of Jesus from the most confusing to the most clear, this parable about the shrewd manager would be right up at the top, if not the very top of that list. The first time I can really remember reading it was when I was in college, working at camp one summer. The curriculum that year was about justice, and it was using this parable for one of its daily themes. In the materials to create the Bible studies, it was clear that the curriculum writers wanted us to talk about forgiving debts, how the manager cuts the debts of the people he encounters to ingratiate himself. And I mean, I guess I can get that. He does decrease their debts, but doesn't completely eliminate them. But I've always had a hard time getting past this notion that Jesus might be calling us to dishonesty or underhandedness. Even if the final results are good, do the ends really justify the means? I think that some of the trouble here comes with the translation. When we hear shrewd, we have negative connotations. We think underhanded, conniving, and sneaky. When I looked up this particular word in my Greek New Testament, I only see the words wise and clever. None of that negative baggage. And even the word in verse 9 that's translated as dishonest is more commonly translated as unrighteous or unjust in other places in Luke's gospel, which doesn't necessarily make it better, but it does adjust the hearing. So I was mulling over these things, and I gathered with other pastors, and all of us are just sort of pulling out our hair at this parable that none of us like to preach on every time it comes up in the lectionary. And one of my colleagues lifted up a really helpful passage from a book they've been reading. The book is The Voice of Luke, Not Even Sandals by Brian McLaren. It's a paraphrase of the Gospel of Luke with devotional notes. And this is how McLaren chooses to retell the story. And see if you can hear how it shifts. Once there was a rich and powerful man who had an asset manager. One day the man received word that his asset manager was squandering his assets. The rich man brought in the asset manager and said, "You've been accused of wrongdoing. I want a full and accurate accounting of all your financial transactions because you are really close to being fired." The manager said to himself, "Oh no, now what am I going to do? I'm going to lose my job here, and I'm too weak to dig ditches and too proud to beg. I have an idea. This plan will mean that I have a lot of hospitable friends when I get fired. So the asset manager set up appointments with each person who owed his master money. He said to the first debtor, "How much do you owe my boss?" The debtor replied, 100 barrels of oil. The manager said, "I'm discounting your bill by half. Just write 50 on this contract." Then he said to the second debtor, "How much do you owe?" This fellow said, 100 bales of wheat. The manager said, "I'm discounting your debt by 20%. Just write down 80 bales on this contract." When the manager's boss realized what he had done, he congratulated him for at least being clever. That's how it is. Those attuned to this evil age are more clever in dealing with their affairs than the enlightened are in dealing with their affairs. Learn some lessons from this crooked but clever asset manager. Realize that the purpose of money is to strengthen friendships, to provide opportunities for being generous and kind. Eventually, money will be useless to you, but if you use it generously to serve others, you will be welcomed joyfully into your eternal destination. Parables are meant to be open for debate, discussion, and interpretation. And McLaren's retelling of Jesus' words here helped me to break open this parable in a new way. When we think of most of Jesus' parables, we tend to think about them allegorically, right? Jesus tells the story, and we assign the roles of God or Jesus and the righteous and the unrighteous, of the ones who did the right thing, which we usually say is like us, the ones who did the wrong thing, which is usually the people who aren't like us. But the more that I think about this particular parable, the more that I am convinced that trying to allegorize it is a fatal error. The only redeemable characters here are the people who have their debts reduced. The rich man doesn't seem to care that he's holding people in debt, and when his manager goes behind his back, he takes this as a good sign. That now this manager's cleverness, this manager's dishonesty can be put to good use for him. The manager, yes, does reduce people's debts, but he does it either to hurt the rich manager, who will now have to honor those debt reductions or lose face, or to save himself when he is fired by making friends. Probably both. Do we want God to stand in for either of those people? Do we want ourselves to stand in for either of those people? I don't know about you, but for me, the answer is no. And so I get much more out of this parable not using it as an allegory, but instead using it as a way to understand God's bigger picture. Parables teach us something about God. And this parable teaches us something about how God would prefer we use our money and think about our money. The manager uses and manipulates money and wealth to create relationships with others so that when he is without a job, he will have people who will take him in. If even an unrighteous man like this can use wealth to build relationships, build community, why can't we? We can use the resources that we have to create and strengthen relationships, to build community, and to support one another. Now, the Gospel of Luke, if you've been paying attention, does not shy away from these conversations about money. And the underlying theme is always that money, wealth, these treasures that we have on earth are not actually ours. They are God's, given to us to be stewards and shepherds of for a period of time. And because it all belongs to God, it is not our job to hoard what we have been entrusted with, or to enable unsustainable and damaging debt because it might line our pockets. No, what we have been given to us is to be used to serve one another, to support the body of Christ, and to care for our fellow human beings and the fullness of God's creation. As a congregation, we see that play out in the ministries that this congregation supports. The resources that we as individuals and as a whole use our resources to contribute to, like Richmond Friends for the Homeless, our local food pantries, Lutheran World Relief. Now, beginning next Sunday, several members of LCOS are going to be sharing with you about why they personally feel it is important to give back to God and to give to their community. Each of them will have their individual and personalized reasons and passions, but I imagine that there will be a connecting thread that ties it back to the singular idea, because God gave it first. We give because God gave first. We forgive because God forgave first. We love because God loved first. Everything that we have, everything that we are, everything that we do is because God was generous first. Amen.